This recording is part 2 of chapter 6 from your textbook, so you might want to listen to part 1 first, but you don't have to. So we finished off talking about, increasing elaboration in language, modeling, ask students to elaborate, ask them to describe objects or pictures spontaneously. We could also think about how you're going to teach form or the structure of language, and you could see page 161 in your textbook. It looks like this. I was going to say I had it. So there are some good ideas in your textbook. Use developmental sequences, use familiar examples, use simple sentences. So, for example, this teacher wrote Julio tagged Maria. I was combining both names together. And then saying it in a different way. Maria was tagged by Julio. Well, it's a lot easier to say that, right? Julio tagged Maria. Or, then there's something like this. Julio chased Maria while playing tag. But this sentence would have been much more difficult for the students to put in a passive voice. So your textbook gives you some good ideas, which is why I wanted to alert you to this particular page number. Encourage extension and elaboration, just like what we've been talking about. And then use concrete objects, right, as much as you can. I've also taken sentence strips and I write words in sentences, and then I cut the sentences, into individual words, put them in a Ziploc bag, and then the students have to manipulate them around until they get the complete sentence, or the correct sentence, I should say. And vary introductions. Okay, so who has the longest pencils, pens, scissors, stuff like that, by making a comparison chart. So that's why I wanted to show you this page, and then I'm also going to show you page 162 while I'm here, and then I'll go back to the PowerPoint. So this is about teaching use. So the last page was form, right? And then this page is use. So, teaching your students how to use language for different purposes, such as greetings, informing, where are you going? I'm going to school now. Demanding, promising, requesting, could you get my blue shoes, please? Or would you take me to school? Something like that. Asking questions that promote interaction. Again, what I talked about in part 1, giving them more than just one word answers, right? Think about if you ever ask a child, oh, what did you do at school today? Nothing. Did you have a good day? Yes. So be more specific and cause them, encourage them. I think I said force, and that's not really the word that I meant. Encourage them to expand on their answers. Oh, tell me one thing you learned in school today. Tell me something you talked about during science class, something like that. What happened next? How did you respond? Something like that will kind of encourage, how about that? Your students to use more language. Also teaching how to use language responsively to adjust to the needs of the conversation or the listener or the situation, right? But thinking about what's going on in the conversation, you might use different language with friends or your parents or your teachers or, something like that, and providing appropriate background information so that listeners can understand what you're saying. Using the rules for conversations and storytelling that are appropriate for the context and culture. So whatever that means to whatever situation you end up in, how can you make the language and the conversations appropriate for the context and the culture? If you travel internationally, the way a sentence is asked or stated might be different than here in the U.S. So thinking about things like that. Okay, so there's some really good ideas in the textbook: role play, pictures or simulations, conversations. Again, it's what we were talking about. If we want a comment, okay, well, what did you do? Tell me about. Request, tell your friend, blah, blah, blah. What do you want? Or a question, ask me. So keeping those page numbers in mind, I think, especially those page numbers from the chapter, I think will be really helpful for you, okay? So again, using developmental sequences, familiar concrete examples, simple sentences when you're starting, especially with our younger students, extension of new form to new situation, concrete objects, again, we talked about that, and vary introductions, provide numerous examples and comparisons. Okay, and then the next one is teaching use, which is on page 162 that I just showed you. 3 major communication skills involved in pragmatics. Again, using language for different purposes. Use language responsively. How are you going to adjust to the situation where you find yourself? Okay. And then use the rules for conversations and storytelling that are appropriate for that context and culture, the context of whatever's going on, right? So effective conversation is taking turns, listening, asking questions, all of those things. Interpretation of expressions, facial signals, body language, stuff like that. We might need to teach our students how to interpret some of those things. And then appropriate verbal and nonverbal cues for the conversation. If you're talking or you have a couple of children talking together and one of them is constantly looking at their watch or looking at their phones, right? We all know a lot of kids have phones. If they're looking at their phones or looking out the window or, kind of talking over the other person, well, there's probably a good chance that they're not really listening, and that's not really being good conversationalists. And some strategies, role play, picture simulations, and conversations, just like we talked about, and like your textbook gives you a lot more ideas. And then you want to think about planning instructions for students who are culturally and linguistically diverse, or CLD learners, right? Diversity, you still want to have high expectations of diverse students, regardless of what their background is, regardless of if they have a disability. You still want to have high expectations. Your high expectations for an individual with a learning disability in reading might not be the same as your high expectations for a learner without a learning disability, but they should still be high expectations for that student, if that makes sense. Because if you set the bar low, guess what? That's all they're going to try for. If you set it manageably high and support those students to get to that bar, they're going to learn a lot more than if you keep your expectations low. All right, so some teaching strategies and accommodations, especially for culturally and linguistically diverse learners. Simplify your language at first, emphasize that key vocabulary, use manipulatives, provide direct experiences, increase wait time, right? So you ask them a question, give them sufficient time to really think about their answer, because, they might be thinking in Spanish or something like that, or another language. And so give them the wait time and then respond to their message that they give you, not necessarily how they pronounce every single word, but are they getting their message across? Build on prior knowledge, use examples from students' culture, and then teach vocabulary, key vocabulary, use photos, videos, advanced organizers, those graphic organizers. Again, we'll talk more about that as we move forward over the semester. Working with families to extend language concepts. So you could send home pictures, descriptions of class activities, encourage parents to ask the child questions about it. Again, not one word answers. Encourage them to ask questions about, oh, tell me about this. Oh, what happened first? Oh, what was the next step? Oh, what did you learn from this? Something, other than just, oh, did you like this activity? Yeah. Did you sit at your desk while you're doing this activity? Yeah. Right. Get the parents and the families to encourage that elaboration. Ask students to write notes to their family, and then again, they could talk about it. Ask students to bring to class any new words they might hear. Maybe not curse words, so you might have to specify that. But any words that they hear at home that maybe they don't know what those words mean. Students could role play new social language concepts. Students could ask parents questions about topics they study, suggest practicing jokes or word puns with the family. Dad jokes are the best. I think it's on Instagram, and it's I think it's Dad Says Jokes, and there are some good dad jokes, and a lot of them are about math, so they're hilarious. But talking about, allowing or not allowing, suggesting that your students go home and practice some of those things with their families, and then encourage families to discuss books that they read with their child. Okay, a couple more. So going back to response to intervention, or MTS squared, right? So working with the speech language teacher. So keeping that pyramid in mind. Remember our pyramid: tier 1, instruction for all; tier 2, instruction for some or small group; and tier 3 might be instruction for one, which might ultimately lead to a referral for special education. But you can work with the, speech language teacher, if there is one, or, you could find a speech language pathologist at your school and implement some language arts and literacy programs. I used to work, when I taught children with autism, I worked very closely with our speech language pathologist. Even when it wasn't her time, to work with my particular students, but she would give me some ideas of ways that I could get them to be more verbal. And some of the students had communication boards, they are communication devices. They were nonverbal. And so she really worked with me to get them to elaborate instead of just saying, the bear or whatever. We got them saying the brown bear who sits on a log or whatever, with their communication devices. So again, thinking about implementing language arts, elaboration, modifying teaching to integrate oral written communication, provide the information, of course, to parents, and collaborate with other teachers and reading professionals as well. Some schools might have a reading interventionist or a reading coach, and they will be very helpful as well. Ways to help students with social emotional communication. Provide information about difficulty with pragmatics, enhance pragmatic communication skills, assist in training school staff, right, to use effective communication strategies and conflict resolution. For all students, and going back to that positive behavioral intervention support as opposed to, okay, I'm going to tell you everything you're doing wrong. Let's look at what they are doing right and think about ways that we could use effective communication strategies if we need to resolve some conflicts. I tell you, sometimes I just combine a lot of words, just so y'all know. So, and how speech language therapists promote RTI? Well, they can explain the role of language in curriculum and instruction and how important language is. They can provide research-based knowledge on language screening and assessment and interventions, and not necessarily for every student, right? If you have a student, they're just not responding to the tier 1, maybe you move them into tier 3 for, learning new vocabulary or something like that. Well, maybe they're still not responding. Well, they might need a language screening or some assessments or some other interventions, not necessarily for every single student in your classroom. The SLPs can help identify screening measures, or SLTs, speech language therapists or pathologists. Either one. Provide professional development, interpret school level progress, and assist in that progress monitoring, which we've been talking about through, under the RTI or MTS squared system. Consult with teachers on issues of language intervention, provide tier 1 and tier 2 language instruction support. Maybe the SLT or P will come into your whole class and provide a language lesson of some sort. And they can also help families understand language basis of literacy and learning. Kind of going back to that, phonology, phonemes, morphology, stuff like that. All right, so that is it for chapter 6. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you for chapter 7.